Okay, everyone, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this event on diversity, equity, and inclusion practices for nonprofits and social enterprises, featuring our speaker, Angela Dorn, as well as our moderator, Jason Spicer. My name is George Mitchell. I'm a professor in the area of nonprofit management here in the Marx School at Baruch College, and director, thank you, of the school's Center for Nonprofit Strategy and Management. We're very delighted to have Angela and Jason with us today to discuss a very important and timely topic. Today, Angela will be sharing some remarks about the first half of the hour, followed by Q&A for the remainder half of the hour. So whether you're here in person or joining us online, please prepare any questions or comments you may have for that discussion coming up a little bit later. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Jason Spicer, who will have the honor of introducing our speaker. Jason's an assistant professor with me here in the Marx School with extensive experience in the nonprofit sector and whose work focuses on social purpose and mission-driven enterprises. So with all that being said, Jason, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. It's good to see everybody here today, as well as those of you who are tuning in via our YouTube channel. As George mentioned, I'm Jason Spicer, and to review what we're going to be doing, we're going to hear from Angela, and then in the Q&A, we're going to have two parts. We're going to have an initial structured part with some prompts from us up on the screen, and then we'll have an unstructured part where we'll hear from you. Without further ado, I do just want to get to introducing Angela very quickly. The reality and the challenge in introducing Angela is if I actually went through her full bio, I would probably take up about 20 minutes of the session, given all the things she's done in her career. The reality is she's served in basically every single C-suite or executive management role on the leadership side, staff side of different nonprofit organizations, as well as almost every board role imaginable at organizations such as the Community Service Society, Public Allies, the NAACP Foundation, Youth Inc., Single Stop USA, the Harvard Club, as well as being a co-founder of Black Her. She also holds an undergraduate economics degree from Harvard College, as well as a law degree from Harvard Law School. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Angela Dorn.
And moving over to the other side. Thank you so much, Jason. And thank you as well to George, Diana, who was really involved in putting this together, Victor, who's in the room, others, our AV people over here who are making all of this possible. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. I am a huge fan of the nonprofit sector. I didn't start there, but I've come to work in the sector, and I really love it. I'm happy to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, DEIB, in the third sector, which is the nonprofit sector. I thought this would just be a lecture exploring some of the things that I've come across in my work as both a nonprofit employee and as a board member on DEIB. So kind of setting the stage, and I hope that this can be informal, maybe fun, interesting. So write your questions down. If you feel like you have to interrupt me at some point because I'm talking too much, you can do it. Jason said he will also do that. So I'm now just keeping track of kind of like my time. I think really ever since George Floyd's death, while DEIB has been a topic that's been like kind of on the agenda for a while, since George Floyd's death in May of 2020, we've really talked about it a lot more. Many corporations, government entities, and nonprofits have been thinking hard about the differences between people and how it can divide us, unfortunately, and how we have to still come together despite our differences. So I think one of the ways that we've focused has been on the discrete characteristics like sex, race, ethnicity, as well as differences in sexual orientation, religion, region in the USA, less political, but that's also an area in which we are divided. To think about, even though we're different, how do we still get along in the workplace, and in particular, how do we respect each other, and how do we talk to each other about both work and just about being human beings? And that's really, I think, what the primary purpose of DEI is. It's to help us get over are isms, and I think all of us are kind of familiar with the traditional isms in the United States. I've talked about some of them: racism, ageism, sexism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, which is not an ism, but it's probably is along the same category. You know where I'm coming from. It's included but not limited to, just like the ways in which we're different. It can make us really uncomfortable talking about the ways that we're different, but I think we are not going to be able to talk to each other unless we can talk about some of the ways in which we are different, and respect our differences, both acknowledge and learn how to respect each other despite our differences. And I think DEIB is part of how we get there. So first of all, who am I to talk about this? Obviously, I'm a black woman, but that doesn't mean I know anything about DEIB. I'll say that up front. I think that I do have some relevant experience. I have more than 20 years of experience as a lawyer, and as it relates to the nonprofit sector, more than 20 years in the sector. I've worked in all three sectors, and I talked about the third sector as the nonprofit sector. I'll explain that. I've been a law clerk. That's the government sector, the first sector, some people say. I've worked in the corporate sector as a corporate lawyer, and for large corporations, which I guess that's the first sector. First sector corporations, second sector government, third sector nonprofit arena. Ever since I was young, I aspired to understand and to improve what divided, like, the U.S. workforce, kind of why. Life experience is what drove me. Earlier in my life, I think I heard from my father, who was an executive in Chicago, working in the hospital field, about his work experiences. He had a family of 6. I have a disabled sister. So and my mother didn't work. She was also a lawyer, but she did not work. She took care of my sister. So my father was somebody who really needed this job, and he had a good job. He had left jobs before. He's kind of like me. I'm like him. He would get upset about, like, something about principle. He left a job because he felt like it was an unprincipled place. He did that once. At his next job, he had an experience at work. He was one of the only actually black executive at a table. And I'm going to give you a trigger warning here now, where he was a vice president, and his boss, who was the CEO, used the N-word at a board meeting. So in front of, like, the board members, in front of his colleagues, in front of everybody, probably no women, it was the 70s, in the room. It was a offhand reference. He wasn't calling my father the N-word. He was, like, using it as, like, a frequent Southern expression to figure out what other problems do we have that we need to deal with today. And my father was shocked, and he was probably more than triggered, but he didn't say anything at that time. He's like, I'm going to talk to the CEO privately about this, and he will understand that he can never do that again because I will call him out publicly. And he told us about it too, because he's like, you're going to face things like this when you go into the workforce, my children. And he also would use my mother as a thought partner. It's good that she was a lawyer because she could think about a lot of stuff. Like, is this worth suing over? Back then, one mere utterance would not have been enough to, like, win a lawsuit. So it was something to talk about. And he did talk to his boss, and the boss was appalled by himself. He's like, I didn't even realize I said it. I'm really going to watch my words. Thank you for giving me. And I apologize. And it never happened again. I'm not saying that the boss was, like, reformed. That didn't happen again. He did other things that were, aggravating. It was the 70s. The workplace evolves. We evolve as human beings. So then I went to work. That was in the 1990s, and I was a new lawyer just out of law school. I had just finished my clerkship, which I had with an African-American woman. She was great. I worked at a large law firm in Chicago, and I decided I wanted to be an employment lawyer because I cared so much about what was going on in the U.S. workforce. Now, I knew I was going to be defending lawsuits because I'm working for a large, and I had some attitudes about that, but I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn what it was all about. On day one, I was talking to one of the managing partners at the firm about workplace policies. I didn't ask about them. He just decided to bring them up. And he wanted to talk about their fraternity leave policy. There had been a change. It was 1992, and the law firm was now offering paternity leave to men. And he's like, we're offering this paternity leave. Men can have 4 weeks, but ha, 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 anybody who takes it will be fired. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, we've got the policy on the books, but anybody who actually takes it, trust me, they're not going to last. I wondered, did he think he was impressing me by telling me this? Because he wasn't. That right there, I was like, having a policy in place that you don't really mean is not the way to go. Opinions about how I felt about the workplace. Told my parents about it. It should be like this. So the man who takes paternity leave will be fired. The woman who takes maternity leave for 12 weeks is looked at askance. That was the 90s. I don't hope that the same is not true today. That's kind of the way things were, and that's not that long ago. That's within my lifetime. Sexuality, was not talked about. People were gay. They didn't talk about it. Nobody even talked about that there could be women who were lesbians. Gender was not an issue. Blackness was hidden in the workplace because you can't hide it. Wasn't really celebrated or talked about. So we were post the civil rights movement, which I think has been one of the most important movements in American history. I'm a student of just in terms of how we treated people in the workplace, but that's still progress. So I was in the corporate world for a while, but I really found my space in the nonprofit sector. I joined that sector, your sector, 20 years ago, and I've led people and HR, now really usually referred to as people or talent, at national startups, at well-established nonprofits, and in local organizations. I've identified issues, I think, with nonprofits being wonderful places to work because they're fearless, the people are fearless, they're curious, but they have their own issues too. I mean, sometimes if you're in the sector, people are like, you don't really expect to be paid to work here, do you? You're doing good work, so why should you be paid? That's outrageous, and I never agreed with that. The expectation is that you're going to work hard no matter what. That's like its own type of DEI-B issue. I also saw that many leaders in nonprofits, including the CEOs, the C-suite people, the managers and the boards, were mostly white, even though the groups that they were helping were BIPOC and non-white. And that struck me as being kind of weird. Why is that? I led internal DEI-B. I learned from experts, and some of them are New Yorkers. Jennifer Rutledge, who leads Delphi Consulting. Race Forward, which is also a fantastic group that does a lot of consulting. I learned from other people so I can teach other people. I've also served on numerous boards. And I'll tell you that you need to think about DEI-B even outside of your mission, because if you don't, you will run into workplace issues that will interfere with your mission. So I focus on DEI-B in this sector as a way of imparting knowledge to what I think are some of the best and most excited people in the American workforce, the people who are about change. So I'll really be quick but I want to shout out to the nonprofit sector. We're a courageous group of people. We are the third sector. We take on the issues that the government and the corporations feel like they can't take on. And that's why a lot of us are here to do this work. And if DEI-B is to last, and DEI-B is not about, I hope that you learned from my initial remarks, some of you already know this, DEI-B is not a new thing. DEI-B is an old and evolving thing. And it is under attack in the same ways that a lot of things are under attack right now in this country. If it is to last, it will probably be pushed forward by groups like people here who are in the sector that believes in the dreamers and the activists who are willing to question why things are the way they are, people like you. And I would also say, I'm glad that the people in the sector are willing to take on hard subjects with a vengeance, with passion. Unfortunately, often with no resources, which can lead to its own problems. But, don't give up. Keep learning, keep evolving, be patient with yourselves and with each other. And I think that, we'll keep making progress as a country in terms of where we're pushing the American workforce, which is progress that benefits all of us. You don't want to. Nobody in this room, I think, wants to be in the workforce of the 1970s, where people are slashing out the N-word and telling women they can't take time off for pregnancy leave, and pretending to be something that they're not. We have all benefited from DEI-B, from the civil rights movement from which it came. We are all freer in this country now because of those movements and because of the laws that were enacted. And if we don't have those things, we will all be less free, I guarantee you. White, black, whatever. So let's talk about some of the good practices that I want to share with you around DEIB. I don't think DEIB can succeed unless you have both internal champions and that you also hire DEIB professionals. So there's a reason that I say this. DEIB is a very complex issue, and I think it requires external assistance because the things that you talk about are hard. Internal employees may be champions, but it's hard to tell your manager, your CEO, your board, that they have issues that they're struggling with on this front. In the American workforce, people get freaked out if you tell them that they're late for work, let alone if you tell them that you think that they have a problem with the way they talk to Gen Z. People are just too scared. So sometimes when you want to talk about a difficult topic, it can be good to bring in the outside experts who have less fear associated with telling what they say is the truth, or at least talking about tough topics. So I say hire consultants. Consultants risk losing you as a client if they tell you something that you don't like, but hopefully they've got enough other clients that they're not afraid to lose any one client. So I think it can be crucial for outsiders to identify and address DEIB issues, even if they're told what those issues are by insiders. It can be crucial for a third party to be willing to come forward and talk about, like, these are the 3 issues that we want to deal with in this organization. You know, I have strategies if you don't have that, but I really recommend trying to work with outsiders first. Practice 2, managing insider-outsider dynamics. The consultant might work with you to drive both the staff and the board to build organizational DEIB goals together. So part of being effective in this realm of DEIB is having goals. And in the same way that you have work goals, like we're going to increase, at a corporation, we're going to increase profits 10%. At a nonprofit, we're going to reach 20% more people than we did before. On the DEIB front, we're going to look like this on our board in a year, or we're going to look like this in the workforce in 2 years. Have goals. That which is measured or which has goals attached to it is more likely to get done. You have annual goals for your work, have annual goals for your DEIB. Next, DEIB does require organizational effort, planning, and leadership support. This is not something that you can do, coming up with goals and implementing them as an aside, like in your extra work hours. You need to allocate time. Leadership needs to allocate time for your DEIB efforts. So it really needs to be a well thought out process. 10% of our time this year will be dedicated to DEIB so that we can make real progress in this area by establishing goals, by hiring a consultant, and by checking in on whether or not we're making progress with those goals and whether our consultant is giving us what we paid money to receive. So goals should also be regularly checked in, with the best practice being checking in on them quarterly, in the same way that you check in on your performance goals quarterly. I mean, I'm not here to tell you what your DEIB goals should be. That's something that is discovered by your organization through internal conversation with the consultant, with senior leadership, which is beyond the CEO. It's with the leaders of various departments, and also with staff, whether it's your existing DEIB committee, which might already have ideas as to what the organization should be aiming to achieve, as well as with the board of directors, with some input and comment from them. So, understandable so far? Okay. Practice 3. If you want DEIB to really be a real thing at the nonprofit level, it's got to be something that the board is involved in. I've worked in the sector for a while, and in many ways, nonprofits, I'm not talking about those at the state level, I'm talking about the independent 501c3 organization, are their own kind of world. There's senior leadership and there's the board. And senior leadership is answerable to the board. not necessarily to staff. So if you want DEIB and other things in your organization to really become a priority, your board also needs to get involved. The board is your boss. Whether they know it or not, your board is your boss. So they need to be at the DEIB table as well. And would bet that if your board is not interested in DEIB, unless you have a very strong senior leadership team, you will not go very far with it. So there's an education process associated with bringing them along too, which your outside consultant probably knows more about than anybody internally. So when I think about what boards should do, I think boards need a general awareness of bring their own knowledge of how workforces work to the nonprofit arena as well. And I think their goals should focus on supporting your organization's programs by supporting staff, by understanding when is staff empowered to speak, when is staff not empowered to speak, what is staff trying to achieve along with the senior leadership team. Another area in which I recommend that boards be involved is in creating, if you have one, a DEIB statement. Your DEIB statement might be as simple as, this organization will continue to move forward to solve its to meet its DEIB goals. Very simple statement, but it's one that a lot of people need to agree with. Your staff, your senior leadership, and your board, and even your constituent groups. If any one of those groups is not involved and on board with that statement, it becomes something that's very easy to attack. Now, and I'll try to break it down. Some people are looking at me kind of quizzically. DEIB statements are often posted on the website. So it's we believe that we're going to change our workforce by hiring more BIPOC people, increase it by 10%. If everyone isn't really aware that that's the statement that you're making, and that's what you're standing behind, you might have staff members who will be that's the last thing you should be working on. You should be thinking about how you're going to help our BIPOC constituents, not on staff, or board members who might be I never said I wanted to increase the workforce numbers on the BIPOC side by any percentage. Not that I don't want to do that, but I needed to be consulted. Bring people to the table first, including board members, so that nobody is surprised by the statement, which is why I talk about boards being involved in creating the DEIB statements. Are you following me, Jason? Anyone else? Everyone following? Okay. Other areas where boards should have their own goals and plans to participate. Most boards lack diverse representation, either racially or backgrounds, et cetera. Many boards are very monolithic. So a board might be encouraged to be thinking about diversifying itself and setting a goal, not just being yeah, we're going to be diverse. Have a goal around diversification. We want to look like our community, the community that we support. Our community looks like this. Therefore, we're aiming to achieve some percentage of that at the board level. I mean, you might serve a 100%, African-American community, but you're probably not going to have a 100% African-American board, because that's a big change from when that's 100% white. But maybe you want to be 25% different. Maybe you want to be 10% different. The board needs to set a goal, understand why it's setting that goal, and move towards that goal. So that's a practice is for the board to be involved in goal setting for that reason. Another easy areas where boards should be thinking about DEIB and setting goals is around supplier diversity policies. You might have a very big spend at your organization. Maybe you spend $25 million a year. Have you thought about who you're spending your money with? Money is very powerful, and you're making a statement when you decide to spend your dollars with various groups and not just any one group. Finally, ensuring fair employment and hiring practices to the best of their ability without getting into the way of management. If you don't have fair employment and hiring practices, the board can end up being on the hook for that as being a named party to a lawsuit. So they should at least have a general awareness of what's going on with your employment practices, and that should be a goal of theirs as well. I hope I'm followable. Okay. So common challenges with board membership and DEIB. I found that boards and the organizations might spend a year trying to make sure that they're bringing on diverse board members. Let's keep it simple. A few women, a couple of black people. A year spent getting these great new board members to join, and they lose those same great new board members within a year. Why is that? Is it like a lack of commitment to DEIB? Is there something else that's going on? I think that there are a few things that can get in the way. One, give-get requirements. Thanks to organizations like Robinhood, which you guys might know since you're here in New York, which have enormous give-gets, like theirs is like $1 million. There aren't tons and tons of BIPOC people and women, just historically, who have an extra $1 million to use to support a nonprofit. So if Robinhood, for example, Rich Berry, I'm going to see him later on, he's a great CEO. I'm sure he's doing everything perfectly. But maybe they want more people of color, but they don't necessarily find that many people who want to make that $1 million contribution. If you're a person of color who's well known, you got a lot of boards who are asking you for their help. So sometimes in the cases of BIPOC people and women, you might have to think differently if you want to have those diverse board members. Do you relax your give-get requirement? Do you think about different ways that people are contributing beyond money to keep them on board? You can say that you are, and you can think like, okay, if someone's a professor, for example, I'm going to ask them to help me with an op-ed, or I'm going to ask them to help me figure out what foundations would support us, and really respect the knowledge that they bring to the table, and give that equal weight as $100,000 or $1 million. That is very hard to do in the United States. And it's also very hard to do, even if you as a nonprofit agree with that, making sure that the entire board agrees with that philosophy is important. Or those members who don't have the money will become they will feel like they are not as valued. And so go in with open eyes as to what these board members can contribute. And if it's not what other board members contribute, are you valuing their contributions in the same way that the rainmaker who brings in $1 million is valued? You need to ask yourself that question and be able to answer it affirmatively if you want to keep BIPOC and different types of board members. I think another thing that people don't think about, I belong to a number of boards where the non-BIPOC board members, it's their only board. Is that nonprofit, it's their only board. They don't know as much about governance and nonprofit governance as sometimes the other board members, BIPOC members who have multiple boards do. So that information that's being brought to the table by your diverse board members, you need to value that as well, because that's the stuff that'll keep you, I don't want to say out of jail, but keep you in business, that knowledge. Nonprofits are real organizations that have to be governed appropriately. And then focusing on belonging. It's kind of like once somebody's admitted to a school, now you're in. Now how do I feel about whether or not I belong to the school? What tells me that I'm actually a real member of this place? And we're diverse board members, it can be ensuring that they have mentors who are bringing them on board and explaining to them as a peer what it's like to be part of this organization, or taking them out to lunch and answering their questions and asking them for their opinions, what are they finding? Making extra effort, and I really think people should make that extra effort for all board members. But I think the lack of belonging that some BIPOC members have experienced is telling us this is something that affirmatively has to be done for them in particular, but really for all board members. Make sure your board members feel like they belong. And show a genuine interest, not just in getting the people on board, but hearing what their concerns are. They might be able to say, oh, I know what your problem is as to why you're not a diverse board. It's because you're not listening, or because this give-get thing is too difficult, or because your meeting times are too difficult. Whatever it is, listen to what people have to tell you as to why you're not succeeding in the realm. Let's talk a little bit about challenges in DEIB, especially in today's world, where, as I said, it's under attack, and you know that that's true in part just from you hear people saying that they're dismantling their DEIB programs. And you hear that, since the Supreme Court's decision in the Harvard case that, DEIB is like a bad word. You might get sued if you use it. That's a little overstating a bit, but it's clearly under attack. To get around that, you have to embed. And do people know what I mean by embed? So you start off with the goals, which is like, this is what we want to do. Okay, now show, and it took me a while to really understand embed, so if you don't, I'll get it, just speak out when we have our Q&A, which is about to start. But embedded means that, like, when I'm hiring somebody, I'm not saying, oh, I got to hire a black person. That's not it. But I'm thinking about, like, DEIB as a whole. What does this workforce really look like? Are there places, leadership? Do we have leaders who are bringing a diversity of opinion, even if they're not bringing a diversity of race? Are we really living by principles that we want to have different points of view in this organization? When I'm promoting somebody, for example, I plan to promote, Victor, who I think is sitting here somewhere. But Victor is a this and a that. Have I thought about people who weren't promoted last year who aren't this and that? That's how you embed it. It's something that's top of mind. You don't just take action without also thinking about, like, all of the consequences on a DEIB level of a decision. So it takes more work. It takes more work in terms of dedicating time to DEIB. It takes more work in terms of reaching conclusions, because it's very hard to just come to a quick conclusion that hasn't really been thoroughly thought out. It takes more time all across the board, which is part of the reason why people can get frustrated by it, because you can't make that decision that seems so easy. You might still reach the same conclusion, but you have to go through a process before you get there. And sometimes in the land of DEIB, somebody said this to me, the process can be as important as the outcome. If the process is messed up, you're going to hear about it. And people are going to be like, you hired so-and-so without even, like, posting the job. Not a DEIB move. So the process can be as important as the outcomes, and embedding it is part of the process, taking the time to think your decisions through thoroughly. And these things are kind of obvious, but I did write it down. It's got to be integral to salary, promotion, and hiring processes as well. Applying DEIB screens when you do your annual reviews and your salary and promotions to see if you have some biases within your organization that you're not aware of. And again, if I'm looking at a promotion sheet that has 10 people on it, and the CEO decided who was being promoted, you might want to have that outside consultant come in and look at this and say, oh, it looks good. Looks like you've thought about, like, all of your different classifications in coming to these conclusions. Or if it's like, oh, you're only promoting black women. It seems kind of weird. Can we talk about that? That'll never happen, right? But could happen. Still, you need somebody else calling you things into question, and you need to be willing to listen to that person in these very, very important decisions. It's not just about, it's about your entire organization and how everybody feels about the workspace. So I'm going to maybe stop there, because I think I'm, like, running a bit out of time. You see the reference to scorecards, tracking things every 6 months minimum, checking in on goals. I really like quarterly better. You can't just let these things go and forget them. I've praised people in one setting about how great they were at DEIB, and then come back 6 months later and they're like, oh, we froze our program. Well, now you're no longer great. You were good, now you're bad. Freezing programs, I get why it happens. There'll be a big blow up and people will be like, we got to pause, we got to rethink this. You are now failing, but just be aware of that, but you are now failing. So let's go back to something like that's positive. It's good that you have the goals. It's good that you are trying to embed this into your organization. So keep pushing yourselves forward. Keep having the DEIB committees. Keep having the conversations. And even if it's like maybe you're not in problem-solving mode, but remain in active listening mode. I think at all times that's an important part of keeping DEIB on all of our agendas. Freezing is basically conceding. So don't do it. I'm going to stop.
Okay.
I'm going to join you.
So why don't we forward to
Questions?
the last slide. There we go. Great.
I want to sit down, though. Is that okay?
So to make this a bit interactive in the Q&A, before we hear questions from all of you, We've got 7 questions up here, and we'd like you to pick 2 with your neighbor in groups of 2 or 3 that you find most interesting to discuss for just a minute or 2. And for those of you who are online on our YouTube channel, if you could put in the chats or the comments there the question numbers that you're most interested in, and Amanda will let us know which you're finding most interested as well. And then we want to hear about your conversations and which question seems to be the most interesting. And of course, you're free to say all these questions are terrible. I want to talk about something else. So let's take 5 minutes and do that now. So.
Committees to boards. That's how often how board members are picked, by nominating committees.
So hopefully by now you've read the list of questions and are moving on to picking 1 or 2 questions. You have a couple minutes left. So you should be wrapping up your conversations. You have 1 more minute.
Let's get 5 minutes. Oh, that's perfect.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really curious to see what questions everyone was interested in. So also you may have been eating, it's lunchtime, you may be feeling a little slouchy. I'm gonna ask you to put your hands up using the motion we used when I was involved in the Occupy movement down in Sakati Park 13 years ago. We would express assent like this with our hands. So question 1, did anybody focus on question 1? Can I see hands? All right, there we go. Question 2. Lots of questions too. All right. Question 3. Okay. Question 4. Okay. Question 5. Okay. Some 5s. Yep. 6. Some 6. 7. Okay. So split. It looks like 2 and 5.
3 was popular.
2, 3, and 5. And then online, I believe we had questions 3, 6, and 7. Those of you on YouTube that Amanda's monitoring. Amanda, is it still 3, 6, and 7, you think, that are most popular? Okay, so for those of you who were interested in 2 and 3, so affinity groups and funding of those affinity groups, does anyone have anything they want to share with us? And if you do, put up your hand, and I'm going to come to you with the mic over there. Hold on one second. What's that? Well, we'll get to you in 1 second. Yeah, and can you just share your name and if you have an affiliation with everyone so we get to know you?
Hi, I'm Debbie, and I'm just a friend of Baruch for many years. Affinity groups. Now, when you like broke down how the 70s, like now is better, but like I've seen things in the workplace. You have affinity groups, but there's no one in that affinity. Like, it's very hard now to say that as a woman, you're being harassed by a white gay male. That's very hard. This happens a lot. It's going rampant. It's also hard to say there's racial discrimination when you're black and the supervisor or whatever is also black. But anytime you try to do something normal, they suppress you. It's like walking into a restaurant and there's a black waiter. And then he feels that if you ask for a spoon or something like that, he doesn't have to do that for you. And all of these things are like running rapid. I mean, there's a virus like there, like with this stuff.
Okay, and we'll get a response from Angela in just 1 second, but I think, Christina, you had a comment as well? Yes?
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm on the faculty here at the Mark School, and I was just thinking about affinity groups that white people and majority groups need affinity groups as well, right? So if the underrepresented groups have affinity groups for safety purposes, then the majority groups or the white people groups should be about dismantling the power structures.
Great. Yes, another comment. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Clara. I'm an MPA student. With affinity groups at my organization, they were really popular in 2020. I think we had 12 different groups. There was also like a couple anti-racist white groups. And then since 2020, they're like still advertised but have kind of disappeared, and we're down to 3. And there's been a lot of, I co-lead an affinity group, but the way that that was started often comes across as the organization asking people of color to take on additional labor to lead these affinity groups, and there's no compensation, and it can be a lot of work. And so they'll advertise for weeks on end inviting people to lead affinity groups, and no one will step up. Yeah, so just kind of curious about that dynamic of, I think we have a lot of patterns of like starting things and then fizzling out.
Anyone else care to share their conversations on questions 2 or 3? Yes.
Thank you. Michelle Winfield. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent, and it's getting me thinking about different things, and especially about establishing, maintaining these groups. What I found, thinking of one board experience, that it's after you have been part of that group, then you find out what's really happening with that group. You talked about policies, so there might be a policy statement, but they're really not following that. For example, if you have a policy statement requires, let's say, $10,000 for entry. You were talking about the million, but let's take 10,000. And then you are part of the group, and then you find out there are legacy people in the group that haven't paid anything, and they are Caucasian. So how do you then deal with those kind of things? It should be more transparent before people enter into these groups.
Anyone else on questions 2 or 3? Yeah, one more.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ramon. I'm a alum here from the MPA program, and I'm just gonna phrase it the way we were talking here at the table number 2 about affinity groups for underrepresented staff. So from my experience, just anecdotally, I've worked at a couple of organizations where, you know, having this whole, trying to be, have empathy for, you know, non-binary or women or female-bodied people, rather. Sometimes, you know, we had to have like men groups to kind of understand this better, or like to talk to each other in like a safe space for us to, you know, ask questions without feeling like we're asking the wrong questions or offending anyone. But just from that experience, a lot of the people who try to do that, it wasn't me, but from just a lot of people who were there, they just didn't feel like they could do that without being like questioned, like why are you there, and stuff like that. So just from that experience, yeah, it's not really a question, but just an experience about how that could be improved. Because just from there, like a lot of people left that organization, people who identify themselves as, you know, men and masculine body people. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Angela, do you have, oh, I got one more.
Adding to what the gentleman said, we have, I'm Wendy, part of the MPA, and getting in the capstone with Professor Spicer. And we as a capstone, we are recoding organizations from economic and development nonprofits, and we were recoding their websites on affinity groups, and we recorded 222 organizations, and not many had affinity groups included in their websites. Now the question is how important is to have these included in their website and in their organizations.
Thank you. Okay. Angela, do you care to respond?
I can try to respond. I probably don't have an answer for everything. I used to think no, you shouldn't have affinity groups, especially if you had a small workforce. But I've evolved. I actually think, yeah, you need affinity groups, and you probably need them for every group, both majority or whatever your majority is, whether it's white or not white, as well as other groups, especially if people want them. Don't force people to have them, but if people want them, you should have them. I don't know. I'm going to start off saying something I forgot to say. So Jeff Canada, I'm throwing out names. Jeff Canada, the great Jeff Canada, who started the Harlem Children's Zone. When I first got into the nonprofit business, he said, watch out, this is not for the faint of heart. And I'd say the same thing about DEIB, not for the faint of heart. You're going to experiment a lot. You're going to succeed sometimes, and sometimes you're going to fail. But you have to keep doing it. That's the most important thing I can say. If people are approaching it with not a real desire to be productive, maybe you don't have those people participate, but keep doing it. Yes, yes to affinity groups, yes to supporting them financially by the C-suite. Possibly your group needs to be led initially by a C-suite member to get it growing. Probably needs goals to have something to come back to and to talk about so it doesn't just die on the vine. That being said, it may have a natural life cycle. And it could be that you're doing it for a while and then it kind of fades out and you have to, somebody in leadership has to try again with those ads that you're talking about to get people to come back to the table. I do, in general, support them, but it is a free country, so you can't force people to do things, but people should have an opportunity to talk about the things that are top of mind for them, whatever group they're from. So try to do it.
And do you have thoughts on Wendy's question about whether, if you have these groups, they should be listed on your website or in your collateral materials?
I think it's definitely something you can talk about in the job application process. I hadn't thought about it about the website, frankly, Wendy, but I think it could come up in the job application. And as you tell people about your organization, we have special interest groups or affinity groups. Now, a year from now, that might be a reason to attack you, but I think it's worth talking about.
Okay, I think next we had question 7 was of interest. Was anyone having conversations on question 7 about how to communicate internally to reduce risk of doxing targeting? Yes, Angela?
I'm going to say one small thing. And I think it was, I wrote down everybody's names. Debbie, too, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, people of color can be prejudiced against people of color. Men can be prejudiced against men. Women can be prejudiced against women, blah, 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 blah.
To make it simpler, where do you go with these complaints? Do you go to an outside organization?
You're supposed to be able to go internally to your people with these complaints.
What people? They're the people that are doing it.
I'm talking about people which used to be HR, which used to be talent. There should be complaint procedures at every organization
But a lot of the times they're the ones that are, big participants in what's going on.
I'm afraid you have to go to the CEO or to the board.
But should you ever go outside is a question.
Yeah, maybe you have to go to a lawyer. I don't know. Is that what you mean?
Or somebody, yeah.
Yeah. Go where you feel like you can get redress. It's better just to try talking internally to solve the problem. But if you're not getting anywhere, yeah.
Usually, a lot of times, that gets you fired or gets you out of the conversation or the place or whatever.
You are correct.
Yeah.
Okay, question 7, internal communications to reduce risk of doxing. Was that something that got discussed at any tables, or did I have that incorrect? Incorrect. Okay, never mind. Is there another question?
That might have been a YouTube thing. I don't know.
Number 5, okay. Tiffany, was that something of interest to you, nominating committees there?
No, sorry, I was remembering the numbers.
No.
I think there might be time for one more question. Is it 5 or something else?
How about an unstructured question? So this is from our structured conversation. Does anyone have a question that we did not hit on or discuss yet?
Thank you. I'm Michael Myers, New York Civil Rights Coalition. My question is all these affinity groups and all this other nonsense, this is ridiculous. That's stereotyping people. How do you avoid stereotyping people in the workplace? How do you avoid stereotyping wherever people are if they're working together across racial lines? Black people don't think alike.
Yeah.
White people don't think alike. Asian people don't think alike. They're different within the group. So why should the Asians belong to the yellow group? Why should the blacks belong to the black group? Or the whites belong to the white group or the Caucasian group? This is outrageous. I used to be the affirmative action officer for the American Civil Liberties Union. Mm-hmm. And we didn't go for this nonsense. We didn't believe in stereotyping people. We always believed in individuality. Now, the board, of course, had a goal. They established a goal, because back then the ACLU was mostly white and mostly men. So they established a goal based on population. We want a board of 50% women and 50% men. So that 90% men business is over with, they
Okay.
said. And they established goals for racial minorities. Back then it was racial minorities. They had a goal of 30% for non-whites, at least a minimum goal. So, but they didn't put the non-whites when they got on the board or in the staff. They didn't put them in that non-white group. You can't stereotype them. You can't group them together. Bring people together in the employment in the sector.
So I obviously agree with that people should be brought together in the employment setting. I do think that people are different, though. There are people, no one's saying that one must belong to an affinity group just because they exist within your organization. What people are saying is that there are people, I also agree that no, racially, people are not monolithic. Whatever group you're in, there's no one set type of person. There are people, though, who feel more comfortable, and I find myself that I'm one of those, who feel more comfortable talking about certain issues, and even like, am I overreacting to this as a black woman? What do you think, black woman? And I don't always get the same answer, but it's very helpful to hear what other people have experienced. But I don't see having affinity groups as stereotyping people. I see it as giving people an opportunity to talk in spaces in which they feel safe. But if you don't like them, don't do them. I mean, as an individual. But those individuals who do like them, that's their prerogative. That's how I see it.
Okay, I think we have time maybe for one last quick question. I see one back here.
Thank you. There's this a growing tendency for a union movement in the nonprofit sector, and I'm wondering if you've seen any or could theorize any connection to DEIB practices and how unions might influence DEIB and nonprofits.
I don't belong to a union, but I love unions. So I think that unions have made the American workforce more fair. I mean, they're racist and sexist and all those other things too, but they're also about labor and making labor stronger. So I personally think it's a positive thing that more and more folks in the nonprofit sector are going that way. And I think it also addresses Michael. For people who are like, we're workers. That's what we are. We're people who are working together. I think that unions can bring some of that to the table. I think it's every protection that you can get in the workforce. I say you go for it. And I think unions have built this country, and that's why they're also under attack.
Okay, well, that's it. We've run out of time for today, but thank you for coming. Thank you for your participation, and thank you to Angela.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.